All right, so we'll get started here in just a moment, but I hope everyone's having a lovely afternoon as they wait for the qualitative data collection webinar to begin. All right, it's 2 o'clock, so or 3 o'clock Eastern. I'm sorry, I am in Central U.S. time, so I have to remember that everything is based on the East Coast. My name is Dr. Joanna Broussard. I am the qualitative mentor and specialist here at Statistics Solutions. We are a full-service dissertation support company, helping you from topic development through final defense and beyond. And this webinar is for qualitative data collection methods. Now, a few caveats before we begin. One, because of the time constraints of the webinars, it is unlikely I will be able to have the time to answer specific questions about your specific study. I will be able to answer questions about more general questions, but your specific study, you would need to get a consultation. I do have the chat up, and I have it where I can see Q&A. Please type your questions there. You will receive a recording of this webinar which will have the PowerPoint and the audio. So what I like to do is I like to be able to pause when I get to a good stopping point, read the question aloud, and then provide a response. So that way, when you're going over the recording, you have the material, the question, and the response to help reinforce. We do have a lot to talk about with data collection methods for qualitative studies, so let us begin. As an overview, we are going to go over some general considerations. We're going to talk about developing instruments and developing questions. We're going to talk about sampling and recruitment procedures. Then we're going to go into specific data collection methods, semi-structured interviews, focus groups, surveys, document analysis, observation, and then tips for best practices before concluding and ending the webinar. I have used many of these methods in one form or another. I have also guided students as a former professor, and I have guided clients here through their own research with multiple methods. So I do have experience and I have expertise. I will talk a little bit about parts of my research when it is appropriate, because it is one of the easiest ways for me to give deep examples. But I will also mention, with respect to privacy, student, colleague, and client research. to show how this works across multiple fields. Okay? So let's begin. The first thing I ask when someone says, well, what method should I use? The first thing I do, how much time do you have to collect data? A lot of people laugh, but qualitative data collection is time consuming. With quantitative methods, you send out the study via a link and you wait. Excuse me, just getting over a cold. Yes, that takes time to wait for people to submit their responses, but with qualitative data collection, you are more often than not going into the field. You are collecting the data in real time. And so you have to balance schedules, your schedule, participant schedule, the schedule of events for the phenomenon. And that's just to collect the raw data. To make it usable, data needs to be transcribed. Interviews, focus groups, all of these things have to be transcribed. Documents, you may not be able to get you may not be able to hold the document up to a copier. You may have to hand copy it. It will depend on the type of document and its rarity. So you need to start, so with that in mind, thinking about how much time you have to collect your data, you need to think about what type of data you will need to answer your research question or your research questions. Because not all forms of data collection will get you the same depth, the same breadth, the same specificity, the same generalities that others will. That's why we'll be talking about each one individually, their pros, the cons, what they're good for, because you need to be thinking about, do I need one or two people's really deep experiences? Could I get away with just surface level data? Do I need particular sources of data that may be hard to come by except in diaries or ledgers? Whatever data you need, you need to think about it as you begin thinking about your data collection process, because that helps you narrow it down. So let's talk about the instruments. For the most part, well, you're going to be developing some sort of questionnaire or some sort of document to help you get at the information. With a quantitative study, you can often use an assessment that someone else has created. Just get permission, written permission. But because of the unique nature of a qualitative study, the combination of theory, of framework, of literature, of artifact, a lot of times data collection instruments that are focused to what you want don't exist. So you've got to make them. You've got to develop the questions for your interview protocol, your focus group. And so you've got to think about how you're going to word them and how you're going to present and argue and arrange them. So, in general, you want something that is more open-ended. You want it to stimulate responses beyond yes, no, or I don't know, stuff. I went to school. If you've had a surly teenager, as some of my friends in grad school and colleagues would describe them, ask your teenager, well, what'd you do today? Stuff. You thought you had an open-ended question, but they saw it as I can get away with stuff because I don't want to talk. So you need to think about, well, can you tell me about a time where you were scared? Could you tell me, why don't you describe for me your favorite thing that happened to you today? You want your participants to engage. You want them to talk. You want them to give details. Qualitative data shines when we have rich, deep conversations with our participants, right? When we get their deep thoughts, when we get their experiences. And so we want open-ended, more, shall we say, essay question format to stimulate these deep responses. But because we don't have unlimited data collection time, so we need to be unambiguous. Our questions need to get to the point, and they need to have clear language that participants can understand. So don't bog your interview protocol down with, well, according to Burke's narrative theory of heroism, drawn on Greek tragedy and epic, what would you say was the defining heroic moment for your military service? A participant in that situation probably has an idea of what heroism means, but you cannot expect your participants to have read the scholarly literature that you have read, to be familiar with it, to understand the theories and the concepts that you are drawing from. So you want the language to be clear so they understand what you are asking of them. And so thinking about how we word the questions, we also want them to be unbiased in their wording because we don't want to lead our participants. If you've ever played the Phoenix Wright video games, if you've ever watched Law and Order or any other cop drama, whenever the lawyers get present in the courtroom, there's always someone challenging the other one. You're leading the witness. You're leading the witness. We want questions that are unbiased, that lead the witness, that lead our participants to tell us their honest experiences, not that lead them to give us what they think we want to hear, or that put them in a position where our biases are showing through. And that's not always easy, right? Also, we want to narrow and define our focus of inquiry so our questions are focused and help us answer our research questions. Best way to do this is to have your questions vetted. Not just submit them to the IRB, but vet them to others. A lot of schools require this, but not all schools require it. Get a panel of experts to review your questions. Get outside eyes to review your questions. Especially people who are intelligent, but who are not in your field. Because if the average intelligent person who is not in your field can understand and can answer the questions well, they may provide feedback. Yeah, I don't know what this means. Could you clarify this? And so that can help you refine and revise your questions. Your data collection instruments, just like everything else in your dissertation, will likely go through multiple stages of revision, right? We revise each chapter, we revise our ideas, we revise our questions. It's okay to have questions stricken. It's okay to have them changed. We're still in the planning stages. The more careful and the more thorough we are with planning, the easier and smoother data collection becomes. So keep that in mind. Now, you've got your questions, you've practiced them. Where do we get our participants? Well, all over the place. You'll get your participants from the population that you seek to study, probably by some non-random sampling method. Purposive sampling, snowball sampling. These are the two big ones, right? Purposive sampling, you will seek participants on purpose whom you believe possess the knowledge and experience to answer your questions. If I'm seeking to understand the experiences of middle school reading teachers who work with English for non-native speakers, or ESL students, then I would purposefully seek out teachers teaching middle school, teaching reading, and teaching to non-native speakers. I would seek those people out, because while other teachers probably have thoughts, training, education, we can't guarantee they have the specific experience and knowledge to answer the question that I'm looking for. So purposive sampling is probably your best bet. Snowball sampling. This is where you find like 3 or 4 participants, and then you ask those participants to recommend others to you. If each of those participants recommends 2 participants, you went from 4 to having a total of 12. Because if you get 4 plus 2 times 4, that's 8. 8 plus 4 is 12. And if each of those 8 give you another one, then you have 20. And your sample size grows like a snowball rolling downhill. Snowball sampling is something that a lot of anthropologists will use in the field. You'll go into the field, you'll have maybe one key informant. Maybe that key informant will then introduce you to 2 or 3 other people. You'll talk to them. They'll introduce you to 2 or 3 more people. You talk to them, and that's how you build up your sample size. Another sampling method you might consider that we don't talk about a lot is convenience sampling. I don't even put convenience sampling on the PowerPoint because convenience sampling is well, I sampled these people because they were available, because it was convenient. It's something that I was trained to see convenient sampling as a last resort. Purposive should be plan A, snowball should be plan B, but you could switch those around. But plan C would be convenience, because you really want to try to get people that you have confidence in who will be able to answer your questions, who will be able to provide you with the data that you need to address your research questions, the study's purpose, and the problem you're seeking to rectify, right? So let's talk about the sample size. How many people should you have? The hard and fast answer, and I'm sorry, I hate telling people this because it always sounds like I'm brushing you off when I'm not, is it depends. Your sample size is dependent upon a lot of factors. It's dependent upon the overall research design. A case study will have a smaller sample size than phenomenology. Phenomenology will have a smaller sample size than grounded theory. Anthropology will probably have a small sample size too, more akin to a case study, maybe larger than a case study, somewhat smaller than phenomenology. So, but these are things to think about. The sample size needs to be large enough to ensure diversity and representativeness of the population in the sample, but it needs to be small enough to allow you to explore the topic in sufficient depth and detail. 30-hour-long interviews might seem great, but it's going to take you forever to analyze. Whereas 10 interviews might be all you need, and we'll talk about why you might need fewer in a second. But let's think about small sample sizes, because I know if you've come from quantitative, oh, you need in the hundreds, you need X number. I've got clients whose departments mandate a minimum of 15 participants in your sample. Well, if your school mandates 15, that's your minimum sample size. That makes it easy for you. Mine did not. But I was also a medievalist for much of my career, and so I was looking at medieval manuscripts, and my sample size was limited by a few factors, okay? If I were studying Beowulf, there is only one manuscript copy of Beowulf in existence. So my sample size would be 1. If I were looking at, say, some of the Icelandic sagas, as I have, we have several different manuscripts from across the centuries, but what does a 13th century manuscript have in common with a 17th century manuscript? Research by those who've already looked at those differences suggests that there are major differences in the two manuscripts to represent changes in culture, which is an interesting study. But if I'm looking at particularly something to do with 13th century Iceland, well, how many manuscripts of a particular saga are there? And then how many of those can I gain access to through having the time and the funding to get to the archives, right? Because they don't tend to ship those across interlibrary loan travel because you got to protect those old manuscripts. The university where I was teaching at before I started working for this company had a massive, one of the largest collections of Silver Age United States Western comic books. Really cool collection, by the way. But, you know, that's one of those things where you have to be able to get there to look at it. How many do you need in a sample? What are you trying to do with that sample? I mean, so you have to think about, do you need multiple versions of the same text? Like, would I need 3 or 4 manuscript copies of the Brynjólfur saga? If I'm doing a deep linguistic analysis of a particular verb usage in that saga, then I need as many manuscripts of that one saga as possible. But if I'm looking at, say, performance of masculinity or gender through boasting in the Icelandic family sagas, then one copy of the Brynjólfur, one copy of the Orvar Adr, one copy of the Morkinskina, one copy of the Magnusona, which gives me then 4 different sagas that have a similar episode, and I can compare the episodes because I want to know about how the episode, the practice based upon literary representations as they have been handed down to us. That's how you, those are things you decide. Do you need more? Do you need observation? How many observations do you need? How many can you get that's feasible? Again, there's no set rule for determining it, and it will depend on your research context. But the goal is to achieve data saturation. Data saturation is the point at which no new codes emerge during data analysis. I had a client who was looking at military preparedness for hurricanes. And so he interviewed 35 generals across the U.S. Armed Forces. We achieved data saturation at 27 interviews. And so he goes, well, what do we do with the rest of them? I say, we don't. Well, why not? We have gone 2 complete transcripts that have been analyzed. No new codes have been generated. You have collected more than enough data to respond to your research questions. That's the point we're going for. When will you achieve data saturation? No one knows. That's you can't fully know. You might achieve it really quickly. You might not fully achieve it. but you might come close where maybe the last transcript only generates 1 or 2 new codes, right? You're not fully saturated, but you're right there. And a lot of, especially for dissertation studies, that's close enough. But the goal should be to seek saturation. You want to reach the point where no new data emerges, no new codes come about. And that's going to change with every research context. It's one of those things that makes qualitative research frustrating and challenging for those who come from a more quantitative background, or for faculty. And I've worked with these faculty who are used to a quantitative analysis. How do you know? And I have to tell them, you don't know. That's the frustration. That's also the exhilaration, because you're going out into the field, you're collecting something. You don't know what you're going to have until you have it. It's like opening presents on a holiday. Some of them are really good. Some of them don't fit. Some of them are downright weird. But all of them give you data. And so once you've sampled, once you've figured out how many people you're going to go for, one thing I do when I talk to clients, and one thing I did when I would talk to students, is I would give them a rough estimate based upon their research design. So a case study, as few as 3, but somewhere between 3 and 6 participants, so you can go in depth. Phenomenology, maybe 10 to 12. General qualitative, 14 to 15, 14 to 16. Ethnography, 5 to 7. Grounded theory, over 20. Closer to 30 or 40. And that's to start for grounded theory. But whatever you think you're going to need, add 3 more. Just in case. Just in case for data saturation. Just in case for data attrition. It's rare, but it does happen that someone gets nervous and asks you to remove their data from consideration. And so if that happens and you've got a few extra, then you don't have to worry. And so that's why having a few extra in your pocket is not a bad idea. You don't have to analyze all the data if you reach saturation, but having a little bit more than you need is better than not having enough. As with any type of writing, it's easier to prune and edit and cut away than to not have enough and to scramble to add. Leftovers can be put in the fridge for another project. But if you don't have enough and you're hungry for more, that's not a good feeling. Now let's move on to talk about specific data collection tactics and methods. We're going to start with probably the most common, the most popular, and the most basic of qualitative data collection methods: the semi-structured interview. This is a conversation between you, the researcher, and the participant. You will ask questions, and the participant will provide responses. One-on-one interviews are great when you really want to go deep, when you want to dive into a person's experiences, perceptions. If you're doing, say, narrative life histories, if you want to talk about sensitive topics like a person's sex life, abuse, mental health, things that people may not want to talk about in public or in a group setting, employment issues. You know, if you're looking at perceptions of teachers related to administrative support, I've had a lot of people go, I'm going to get a focus group. I'm like, well, if you're going to get a focus group and they're all from the same school, you're not going to get the data you need, because these people will all know each other. And so it requires more planning. So that's something to think about. If you want to deal with something sensitive, employment, sex, health, death, mental illness, mental health, religious upbringing, perhaps, maybe trauma. Individual interviews often facilitate people opening up because it's just you and them. And if you really want in-depth responses and you're face-to-face, there's the added pressure of, I don't want to disappoint this person. And if a question isn't clear, the participant can ask you to clarify. If a response isn't clear, you can ask the participant to clarify. So that way you can get a better understanding of what each other's talking about. But interviews can be time consuming. They're often between 45 and 60 minutes in length. So if you have 15 people, that's 15 hours just to collect the data. Transcription can take up to 3 times as long. And I'm using auto captions generated by AI for this. I'm sure you can see that. But that's forcing me to be hyper aware of my pronunciation, as AI doesn't always pick up the right two, or two, and dialect is something that it doesn't pick up, or in my case, my naturally accented speech, which would be my German accent, it can do some weird things. And so you still have to go over it to make sure that the AI that's been recording and providing the transcription is providing a useful, usable, and accurate transcription. I have seen major transcription services vary widely in how accurate the transcriptions they provide are. So just because the AI is big and famous and costs money doesn't mean you're going to get a perfect product. And as you could see there, that okay wasn't an okay because it was me coughing. So things like that can happen. Also, interviews are heavily dependent upon your interviewing skills. how well you build rapport with your participants. How well do you respond to their responses? Do you ask follow-ups? How well do you draw out and elicit through nonverbal communication? All of these things interviewing is dependent upon, and so it's something that you've got to prepare for. Focus groups, like an interview, but it's a small, diverse group of participants that are guided. An interview is one-on-one. A focus group tends to have, say, 6 to 8 participants. Now, you can get a large amount of data really quickly. You're interviewing 6 to 8 people over in the same 45 minutes to a 90-minute span. But group dynamics, strong personalities, all of these things, some people may be hesitant to talk if they see that someone else is really talking. And so you may really get good data from a few. You may only get surface data from all of your participants. So you have to learn as a facilitator how to draw everyone into the conversation. And because it's in a more public group setting, participants are often hesitant to share sensitive data. So if you need a topic like that, you're probably not going to get it in a focus group. Focus groups often do not go in depth. They're good for, like I said, they're good for surface data. So if you want to do a mixed method study and you just need a few questions answered by your participants, a focus group wouldn't be a bad idea. But if you're seeking to really explore a particular case or a phenomenon, a focus group would not be helpful. Individual interviews would be more helpful. Now, let's talk about qualitative surveys. This is where you have more structured questions to gain information about large groups of participants. They can be done in person, over the phone, or online, conducted remotely, which is a big plus these days. You can get large amounts of data really quickly. In qualitative studies, a survey is great if you want demographic information. It gets you your demographics right there. You can see the percentages. You can do a really quick demographic table in SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics. Boom. But can you ask open-ended questions? Yes. But your responses may be very limited. A lot of my clients have found that their open-ended questions they thought would generate essay responses, paragraphs of data. They got one sentence. They got a phrase. And that's very common with qualitative survey. So the data you get becomes limited to question type, response length, the amount of time your participants are willing to spend answering your questions. And so it's totally random. And it is something I don't advise unless it is the only way you can really collect data. Document analysis. As the name implies, this is examining and interpreting written or visual documents. newspapers, reports, emails, books, poems, manuscripts, art, scripts, television shows, movies, theatrical performances, protests, protest recordings, I should say. Anything that has been recorded in a form that is transportable in some way. Documents can provide a wealth of information. They can be conducted, the analysis can be conducted remotely. Perhaps you can, if you're, the Royal Shakespeare Company is recording stage versions of the plays, so you can view them remotely without having to get to London. The British Museum is digitizing its medieval manuscript collection, so you can view the manuscripts remotely. All of these things allow, all of recording technology, from film reels to DVD, etc. I know the DVDs are being phased out, but even different MOV files, MP4 files, audio files, image files, these things can be accessed remotely, so you may not have to go to the place where the document is housed. Not everything is accessible remotely, and if you go and see the actual document, which includes memorials, seeing the thing in person can tell you things that a digitized image cannot tell you. With manuscripts, you can see erasure marks, you can see spills in more detail, you can see where bookworms or too many changes from, have caused the document to thin. Sometimes you can see what was on the document before the current document. A lot of times people will just write over other documents in the margins. You can see, you can look at the size of the manuscript, you can look at the size of the text. I mentioned monuments. If you go to you can get a picture of a memorial and you can analyze what's written there. You can probably be told it's made of granite or marble. You can see some weathering, but going to where the memorial is can also tell you more details, because it's easier because you're there, right? You can see things that, even the best digital recordings don't always pick up. But, depending on the data collected, the documents may provide some level of objectivity. School records, grade logs, test scores. Test scores tell you how students scored on a test, but they don't tell you how many students took the test hungry or had to work the night before to help support their family, took the test sick. They don't tell you about the conditions that may have impacted the test scores, but you get the objective test score. So depending on what you're looking for, they can help there. Document analysis can be just as time-consuming as any other form of analysis. You've got to find the document, read the document, and interpret the document. And as I've just described with test scores, the context of the document is limited. Again, I did a lot of medieval work. We have one manuscript of Beowulf. That manuscript features two dialects of Old English, the East and the West Saxon. Why did we switch from East to West Saxon? We have no idea. We assume it's because a different monk finished recording the manuscript, but we don't know. And we have at present no way of knowing. So we have knowledge of something happening, but we have no context for the why. And that's a limitation of document analysis. And now observations. Observations are where you go out into the field and you observe and document actions, behaviors, and interactions of participants in the natural setting. They can be structured, following a predetermined set of behaviors, such as a ritual. Maybe you're going to observe a Latin language mass. Maybe you're going to observe a coming of age ritual, a funeral, a celebration, a birthday party. I saw a TikTok this morning saying that in various parts of America, there are differences in birthday party etiquette for opening presents publicly. So maybe you want to study to see what's more common, what factors lead to, yes, we open our presents in front of the gift giver, or no, we open them in private and then send a thank you note. Going back to thinking about document analysis and memorials, observations can shine light on how people interact with that memorial. Do people place little trinkets on that memorial as a sign of respect, as a way to ward off evil spirits, as kitsch? I know when I went to Washington, D.C. for the first time, you're walking around this area, people are talking, people are jovial, and then you get to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, the wall. All of a sudden, everything goes silent. And there's this reverent thickness in the air that if you just look at a picture of the wall, you can't explain, you can't express. But if you go there and you just observe how people interact, you observe people looking for friends, looking for family members. You observe them finding and how they respond to the act of finding that name. You see things like this. If you're looking at classroom behavior, you might want to observe a few classrooms. You may or may not participate. It depends. The hallmark of anthropology is the researcher participates in that which they seek to understand, so that way they can gather notes on the embodied act of performing of participating in a festival, of a Latin mass. If you've only ever done if you grew up, say, evangelical, and you've only ever had religious services in your vernacular tongue, the idea of participating in a Latin mass, a mass where the language used is not a language spoken by the participants. it's a very interesting experience to be in that situation, right? What does it mean to participate in a ritual? What does it mean to prepare, to go through the preparation process, to go through the ritual, to come out the other side? What was it like to participate in a festival, or in something like, say, small town Courrier du Mardi Gras? Hey, they got Courrier, but they didn't get Mardi Gras right. Or there we go, Carnival, for those like me who know it that way. What does it feel like to participate in an Alpine Krampusnacht celebration? It's awesome. But, observation can provide rich, in-depth data for understanding the setting, the context, the behavior. This is also, like everything else, it's conducted in real time. You can only observe these activities when they actually occur. Certain festivals, like Krampusnacht, only occur on December the 5th. Mardi Gras only occurs in Mardi Gras season, carnival season. So you're limited, and you may have to then arrange your data collection around those events. It's time consuming. These events occur where they occur, and you have to go there, right? Will your presence influence the event? Maybe, maybe not. That's something you've got to weigh and you've got to think about. And surprise, surprise, it can be difficult to get sensitive and private data at public events. But you can get the event and then maybe have 2 or 3 participants whom you interview in private, one at a time, to get that deep data. It depends on what you're going for. So, we're running low on time. Let's do some tips for best practices. Consider your research questions in your purpose statement. Think about the context. Consider your role and how it will impact data collection. Reflect on all the ethical aspects and considerations you have to think about. How do you plan to validate the data? Be open to changing your plan. Sometimes things happen. We learned that with COVID. Bring batteries, bring chargers, bring extra pens, pencils, and notebooks. Bring more supplies than you need, because again, better to be over-prepared than under-prepared, right? So, that being said, we are almost out of time. Should you need more assistance, we at Statistics Solutions are a full-service dissertation consulting company providing graduate students and others with timely editorial support for your dissertation and other scholarly projects. As I've said, we can help from topic development all the way through preparing for your final defense and turning your dissertation into an article of publishable quality if necessary. So, just 1 second, Felicia. Let's see. Mentioned a new app that would help students planning and staying on track. The app itself is for data analysis that I recall. If there was anything I mentioned with chapter 1, it may have been Goblin tools for keeping you on track. I don't recall that specifically, but it does feel like Goblin tools might have been the ones that I mentioned. I can't say beyond that, but Goblin Tools is something that I have used in the past and for other projects because it will help you break down any project into a manageable series of actions. So that's probably what it was, but off the top of my head, I don't remember. As I was saying, for information about our services and to receive a complimentary 30-minute consultation with our knowledgeable expert sales team, who is available Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Oh, it sounds familiar? Good. Do not hesitate to contact Janine Glace at info@statisticsolutions.com or phone at 1-877-437-8622. Again, that phone number is 1-877-437-8622. We are here to help you with qualitative, quantitative, critical, and mixed methods analyses from start to finish with whatever level of support you require. We have someone who can help with that query. So that being said, whether you do contact us for service in the future or not, we wish you the best of luck and the greatest success in your academic, in your professional, and in your personal goals. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Dr. Jana Broussard, a qualitative research mentor here at Statistics Solutions. And once again, thank you. I bid you a good day and have a lovely, lovely week. Goodbye.